Ever wondered how peasants managed to survive those bone-chilling medieval nights? Imagine waking up in a world where the coldest of winters could be your deadliest enemy, and the simplest of things, like staying warm, was a daily struggle. This isn't just a tale of survival, it's a peek into the everyday lives of medieval peasants, where every night was a battle against the cold. Drop your thoughts below. What medieval peasant tales or chilly night secrets should we uncover next? Let's dive into this world, shall we? Picture this: the year is somewhere around the 14th century, and the world outside your small rustic cottage is a winter wonderland. But it's not the kind of wonderland you'd find in a fairy tale. It's a harsh, unforgiving landscape where snow blankets the ground and icicles hang from the rooftops like frozen spears. The air is so cold it stings your lungs, and the wind howls like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Inside your cottage, the warmth is a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The walls are thick and made of stone, providing some insulation against the winter chill. But it's not just the walls that keep you warm. The hearth, a large fireplace built into the center of the room, is the heart of your home. It's where you cook your food, light your candles, and gather with your family. The fire crackles and pops, sending a comforting glow that dances on the walls and casts long shadows. The smell of wood smoke fills the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the straw that lines the floor. The straw isn't just there to make the floor softer underfoot, it's also a layer of insulation that helps keep the cold at bay. You might think that living in such a simple dwelling would be uncomfortable, but to a medieval peasant, it was a necessity. The winter months were the harshest time of the year, and every little thing counted when it came to survival. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we talk about how peasants kept warm, let's take a step back and look at their daily lives. Life as a peasant was tough, no matter what time of year it was. From dawn until dusk, they worked the land, tending to crops and livestock. The days were long and the work was never ending. But when winter came, things changed. The fields that were once lush and green were now barren and covered in snow. The animals that grazed freely during the summer months now needed to be sheltered and fed, and the crops that were once abundant were now scarce. Winter was a time of scarcity, and peasants had to be resourceful to make it through. But how exactly did they do it? Well, for starters, they relied on the food they had stored during the summer and fall months. This included things like dried fruits and vegetables, smoked and salted meats, and grains that could be turned into bread and porridge. The diet of a medieval peasant was simple and straightforward, but it was also nutritious and filling. They didn't have the luxury of choosing from a wide variety of foods, but they made do with what they had. And speaking of making do, let's talk about their clothing. Peasants didn't have wardrobes full of different outfits. They had a few pieces of clothing that they wore, day in and day out. These clothes were made from simple materials like wool and linen, and they were designed to be warm and durable. In the winter, they would layer their clothes, adding thick woolen cloaks and heavy boots to keep the cold at bay. But even with all these layers, staying warm was still a challenge. That's where the hearth came in. The hearth was the centerpiece of the peasant's home, and it was where they spent most of their time during the winter months. They would huddle around the fire, sharing stories, and keeping each other company. The warmth of the fire was a welcome relief from the cold outside, and it provided a sense of comfort and security. But the hearth wasn't just for warmth, it was also a place for cooking and lighting. Peasants didn't have electric stoves or light bulbs. They cooked their food over an open flame, and lit their homes with candles and oil lamps. The smoke from the fire filled the air, mixing with the smells of cooking food and damp clothes. It was a sensory experience that was both familiar and comforting. But let's not forget about the sounds. The sounds of medieval life were different from what we're used to today. There were no cars or airplanes or televisions. The only sounds were the natural ones: the crackling of the fire, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves. And when winter came, the world outside became quiet. The snow muffled the sounds, creating a peaceful stillness that was both beautiful and eerie. But the quietness was also a reminder of the dangers that lurked outside. Winter was a time of scarcity, and it was also a time when wild animals were more desperate for food. Wolves, bears, and other predators would roam the countryside, searching for anything they could find. Peasants had to be on guard, especially at night when the darkness made it harder to see. But despite the dangers, peasants found ways to make their homes safe. They would lock their doors and windows, and they would keep weapons like spears and axes nearby, just in case. They also had to be careful about fire. The hearth was a source of warmth, but it was also a potential danger. Sparks could easily fly from the fire and ignite the wooden beams of the cottage, turning it into a blazing inferno in seconds. So staying warm and safe during the winter months was a constant struggle for medieval peasants. But they were resourceful and resilient people who knew how to adapt to their environment. They used every tool and trick at their disposal to make it through the coldest of nights. But there's more to the story than just staying warm. Peasants also had to deal with the physical toll that winter took on their bodies. The cold and damp conditions made it easy to get sick, and illnesses like pneumonia and the flu could be deadly. Peasants had to be careful about their health, and they used natural remedies like herbs and teas to stay well. But even with all these challenges, peasants still found ways to enjoy life. They had feasts and celebrations during the winter months, where they would gather with their neighbors and share food and drink. They would sing songs and tell stories, creating a sense of community and togetherness. And let's not forget about the children. For them, winter was a time of wonder and excitement. They would play in the snow, building snowmen and having snowball fights. They would also help their parents with the chores, learning valuable skills like cooking and sewing. Winter was a time for learning and growing, even amidst the hardships. But winter wasn't just about survival. It was also a time for reflection and planning. Peasants would use the winter months to plan for the coming year, thinking about what crops to plant and what animals to raise. They would also take stock of their resources, making sure they had enough food and supplies to last until spring. And as the winter months wore on, peasants would start to look forward to the coming of spring. They would watch for the first signs of warmer weather, like the melting of the snow and the return of the birds. And when spring finally arrived, they would breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they had made it through another winter. But the story of medieval peasants isn't just about winter. It's about their daily lives, their struggles, and their triumphs. It's a story of resilience and resourcefulness, of people who knew how to make the most of what they had. And it's a story that we can all learn from, no matter what time period we live in. So as we think about the lives of medieval peasants,